You open the app, you scroll, someone posts a trip, someone posts a promotion, someone posts a photo that looks effortless and somehow perfect. You have something to share too. Maybe a thought, maybe a moment that actually meant something to you. You even typed it out once, but then you deleted it. You told yourself it wasn't interesting enough, or the timing felt off, or you just didn't want the attention. But here's what's strange. You keep coming back. You watch, you observe, you never disappear completely. You just never show up. And if someone asked you why, you'd probably give a simple answer. I'm just private. Or, I don't really care about social media. But there's something underneath that answer, something that feels more complicated than privacy. And if you've ever felt a quiet pull, like part of you wants to share but something stops you, then what you're about to hear might explain more than you expect. Because the reason people avoid posting isn't usually one thing. There are actually 5 very different patterns, and most people only recognize themselves in one until they hear all 5. The first type is the Perfectionist Ghost. This person has ideas, real ones. They draft posts, plan captions, take photos with full intention, but nothing ever gets published. Why? Because it's never quite ready. The lighting, the wording, the timing, something is always slightly off. Psychologists call this a form of self-imposed paralysis rooted in fear of negative evaluation. The brain doesn't actually fear failure. It fears judgment. And judgment from an audience, even a small one, activates the same threat system as physical danger. So the perfectionist waits, and waiting feels safe. But here's the quiet cost. Waiting forever looks identical to giving up. The second type is the silent observer. This person has watched social media long enough to feel deeply aware of how it works. They see the performance behind every post, the filters, the angles, the carefully chosen words, and they want no part of it. But here's a loop worth keeping open for now. Is that clarity, or is it a shield? Let's slow down here, because both of these patterns and the 3 coming all share one underlying brain mechanism. When you consider posting something personal, your brain runs a fast, mostly unconscious calculation. It weighs potential reward against potential threat. The reward is connection, validation, being understood. The threat is exposure, criticism, embarrassment. Here's where dopamine enters. Dopamine isn't just about pleasure, it's about anticipation. When you imagine posting and getting a positive response, dopamine rises slightly. But when your brain predicts a negative response, silence, judgment, being ignored, your stress response activates faster than the dopamine reward can balance it. Think of it like a scale. On one side, the hope of connection. On the other, the fear of exposure. For most people who avoid posting, the scale tips toward threat. Not because they're weak, but because their nervous system has learned to treat social visibility as risky. This is called the threat-reward imbalance, and it runs quietly in the background every time you hover over the post button and then close the app. The third type of non-poster is the burnt-out believer. This person used to post. They were active, engaged, maybe even consistent. But over time, the pressure to maintain an image became exhausting. The performance drained them. So they stopped, not from fear, but from depletion. Their dopamine system essentially associated posting with effort and stress rather than joy. And the brain, very efficiently, began avoiding it altogether. Here's where it gets heavier. The fourth type is the invisible achiever. This person is doing genuinely interesting things, growing, learning, building something real, but they share almost none of it publicly. They tell themselves it's humility, it's focus, it's not needing validation. And maybe some of that is true. But quietly, something else is happening. Opportunities pass them by, not because they aren't capable, but because no one knows they exist. In work, in creative fields, in building relationships, visibility matters more than most introverted people want to admit. And underneath the silence is often a belief they've never fully examined. If I show up and no one cares, that confirms what I fear about myself. That's not humility. That's protection. The fifth type, and perhaps the most psychologically layered, is the identity uncertain person. This person genuinely doesn't know what to post because they don't yet have a clear sense of who they are publicly. They ask themselves, what is my voice? What do I stand for? What will people think this says about me? Social media asks you to perform an identity before you've fully formed one. And for people still figuring themselves out, which is more people than anyone admits, that pressure creates a kind of paralysis that looks like indifference but feels like confusion. Across all 5 types, the hidden cost is the same: a quiet shrinking, a version of you that stays smaller than it could be, not by choice, but by pattern. Now here's the part that almost never gets said. Every single one of these 5 types carries a genuine strength inside the avoidance. The perfectionist has high standards. The silent observer has awareness most people never develop. The burnt-out believer has experience. The invisible achiever has depth. The identity uncertain person is still asking real questions, and that's more honest than most people who post with false confidence. The avoidance isn't the problem. The problem is when the avoidance becomes permanent, when a protective pattern outlives what it was protecting you from. You were careful because something in you is worth protecting. The question worth sitting with is this: are you still protecting something fragile, or are you keeping something real from being seen? There's no answer you have to perform, just one worth knowing for yourself. Remember that moment at the beginning, hovering over the post button, then closing the app? That moment isn't weakness, it's a signal. And now you have a map for it. 5 types, 1 shared brain pattern, the threat-reward scale tipping towards silence. The model is simple: awareness to pattern to choice. You can't choose differently until you see the pattern. You can't see the pattern until you name it. And now you can name it. Whether you're the perfectionist who waits, the observer who watches, the achiever who hides, the depleted one who stepped back, or the person still forming, you're not broken. You're running a learned response. And learned responses, unlike personality, can shift. Not everyone needs to post, but everyone deserves to understand why they don't. The 5 types aren't categories to be fixed. They're mirrors, and mirrors are only useful if you're willing to look. If something in this felt a little too familiar, that recognition is worth paying attention to. There's another side to this worth exploring. What happens psychologically when people do show up, and why that feels harder than it should?